Well, welcome everybody. My name is Nick McEwen Hall from Open Door Coaching. It's great to have you here today. We're looking today at what mental health is, and we're looking at mental health first aid. So mental health first aid is a new program, a new course that Open Door is running. It's certainly not a new program here in Australia. Nearly 1 million people have done this program, but it is something new that Open Door is opening up and offering. So we thought we'd run this webinar for you to have a bit of a look at the course and also have a bit of a deep dive into mental health. So welcome, it's great to have you here. I'll talk a little bit more about the course as we go forward, but first of all, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. And also of the elders of the land on which you are today as well. The other acknowledgement I'd like to make is today, particularly pertinent given the topic, is just our lived experience of mental health. As we'll see shortly today, the statistics around the incidence of mental illness and mental health problems in Australia is quite high. So the likelihood is, with the group that we have on the webinar today, and in our organisations and in our friendship circles and our family networks, the likelihood is that one of us will be experiencing or will experience at some point in this 12-month period a mental illness, or someone around us will. So we just want to acknowledge the lived experience of those who do have mental illness, or those people who are caring for people who do experience mental illness. Now, content today, we're going to be speaking about mental health issues today in some detail for some of them, and some of the content you might find a little bit confronting. So please do let me know if that's the case. Send me a message in the chat box and just let me know if you are finding it a little bit confronting. It's very normal for this to occur. If it doesn't always happen. I'm not preempting it, but certainly sometimes, because we're talking about this issue and it's quite a personal one for some people, it can be a little bit distressing. So if you do feel that, or you do feel some distress or some anxiety around what the content we're covering, just know that that's a normal reaction and it happens quite a lot. But also let me know that that's the case for you, and I will follow up with you after the webinar. So it just says there, please reach out if that's the case. Send me a message and let me know, and I'll reach out to help you. All right, so today I want to have a look at, with you, mental health problems in the workplace. So we're going to have a look at mental health in general, but we're going to contextualize it to how mental health plays out in the workplace. So, you know, the issues that it causes and the impacts that it has. We're going to have a look also at how we support an employee who's experiencing a mental health problem or a mental illness. And we're going to have a look at the mental health first aid course and how we do mental health first aid in our workplaces. So this phrase, mental health first aid, I want you to think about mental health first aid as exactly the same as physical first aid, except for mental illness, not physical illnesses. So the two terms are interchangeable. The approach and the idea and the reason why we do it are the same. It is about providing first aid for mental illnesses. So just as you might have gone and done a CPR course or something like that, you know, a one-day refresher program for physical first aid, mental health first aid operates in the same way. It's the same sort of thing. We're just looking at mental illness as opposed to physical illness. So these are, just to start getting our heads around some of the terminology that we'll use today. Now, this session today is an opportunity to talk about mental health problems in the workplace and, you know, to talk about mental health first aid in a general kind of nature, but we're not going to learn the mental health first aid skills and actions. You know, today is about getting our heads in this space of looking at mental health and mental illness and understanding it, as well as its impact on the workplace. And we will have a look at the course, but it's not a substitute for doing the mental health first aid course. We've done a few of these courses in the last couple of weeks, and some people had come in those courses. They'd come from one of these webinars that we'd done, and they were certainly glad that they had invested the 2 days to do the program. So yeah, we're going to talk about mental health, but it's not the mental health first aid actions or skills that we're learning today here on this webinar anyway. So it's very much a starting place. It's very much a starting point. We want to open up a conversation about mental health and mental illness, and we want you to start thinking about how your workplace manages and supports those people who are experiencing a mental illness or a mental health problem. Or if you're a coach, how these skills might impact the coaching that you can do and impact the engagement and the rapport that you have with your coachees or your coaching clients. So we're not going to be able to cover everything about mental health today, and certainly in our 2-day program we don't get to cover every single aspect of mental health, but what we are going to do is take a really good starting point and having a look at the issue. So I told you that it would be a bit interactive. So here's the first question I've got for you, everybody. What is mental health? When I say to you, you know, what is mental health? What comes to mind? What do you consider when I say to you, what is mental health? How would you define it? What are the things that come to mind even? It doesn't have to be a definition. It could be just what comes to mind for you when I talk about mental health. Let me know in the chat box what it is that pops up for you when I say, what is mental health? There's no right or wrong answer, by the way. You know, we will learn some skills and some facts and some stats later, but you know, in this sort of early stages, there's no right or wrong answers. So Maribel says your ability to deal with change and that you have resilience in your perspective or your mindset. Yeah, great, nice one. Absolutely. What else, guys? What else do you associate with mental health? All right, so a couple of, yes, temporary, enjoying your life, engagement, or it could be temporary or permanent. Yes, that's right. Excellent. So these are all good things that come up with mental health when we talk about what mental health is. It's a well-being thing, really, in a lot of ways. You know, how well we feel can be a mental health state. So let's have a look at a bit more detail, shall we? So I want you to think about mental health as a continuum where we have good mental health at one end or excellent mental health at one end, and we have poor mental health at the other end. And it is very normal for us as people to be at some point, well, every day we're at some point along this continuum. It is normal for us to move along this continuum as well. So it's very, very normal for us to feel really great some days, and on other days to have poor or fair mental health. To feel like we have poor or fair mental health. We can move up and down this continuum. And it happens because, well, we move because of all sorts of things. You know, we might have a stressful deadline coming up at work, and so we feel anxiety or we feel stress, those sorts of things. And it might be poor or fair. But then when that stimulus moves or it changes or the deadline's met or the project's finished, we'll move back along the continuum to good mental health or excellent mental health. So it's very normal for us to move up and down the continuum. And that can happen from day to day. It can happen from week to week. It could happen from moment to moment. You know, it could be something that happens very quickly. It could be something that happens very slowly. But it is absolutely normal for us to all be at some point along this continuum at any one time and to move along the continuum. Does that make sense? Does that feel right to you? Can you identify with that yes, you know, you have times in life where mental health is great, and other times we have mental health that's not so great. Yeah, Maribel says absolutely yes. So yeah, this is what happens, and it can be arranged for a range of reasons. The risk factor for becoming a mental health issue or becoming a mental health problem we'll cover in a second, but these are the things that increase a person's risk factors for developing a mental illness. So there's 3 of them. There's biological factors, psychological factors, and social factors. So biological factors are things like a hereditary illness. So some mental illnesses are hereditary, or a family impact is part of a mental illness. Biological factors can be things like our brain chemistry and things like that. What also comes under biological factors is how fit we are. So if we exercise regularly or we don't exercise regularly, how active we are. So these are all biological factors. You know, if we have this stuff or we don't have this stuff, it'll affect our risk factors or our likelihood of developing a mental illness. Psychological factors refer to things like our ability to cope with change, or our ability to deal with emotions, the skills we've learnt on how we think and see and perceive the world, and how we deal with change, deal with complex feelings, deal with emotions. So these are the psychological factors. And then social factors are things like, these are things like our ethnicity, you know, what social constructs we belong to, our gender, whether or not we are sexually diverse, things like this, social factors, whether or not we have stable housing, whether or not we're employed, those sorts of things. So there's a wide range of things to think about as risk factors for developing a mental illness, and we'll cover this in a little bit more detail in a second. But generally speaking, these are the three categories of risk factors: biological, psychological, and social factors. Now, the question often comes up for me that you know, how do I know if I'm just having a bad day, or how do I know if there's something I need to be concerned about? You know, and this comes up quite a bit when we're thinking about the mental health continuum. If we say that it's reasonable to move up and down the mental health continuum, then yes, you know, we will move up and down this continuum. But how do we know if we're having a bad day or if we've actually developed a mental illness? A question from Maribel says, where is PTSD? So post-traumatic stress disorder. PTSD is a mental illness. So these risk factors that we're talking about here are things that would contribute to somebody developing PTSD. So the psychological factors, biological, etc., etc. Yeah. So PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is actually a mental illness. These things on the screen here, these three categories, are the factors that would put someone at high risk of developing a mental illness, of which PTSD is one. So how do we know if we need to be concerned? So there's a little kind of a bit of a formula here, and it's basically that if there's a major change in a person's normal way of thinking, feeling, or behaving. So if there's a major change in the way that somebody's thinking, feeling, or behaving, if these changes affect the person's ability to function, whether that's at work or in a social setting or in a home setting, and if these changes don't go away quickly, or if they last longer than expected. So for example, I'll give you an example. A few months ago, one of my dogs passed away, and it was very sad. And I was sad for a few days. I was quite sad for a few days. I would even go so far as to say I was probably a little bit depressed about it in a few days. You know, I was grieving. It was grief. But that sort of passed after a few days. You know, I took a day or two off work, and that was all fine. But you know, after a couple of days, I was back to doing things. And in that case, we would say, look, we don't necessarily need to be concerned that this is developing into a mental illness. It's a temporary shift along the continuum. And as it says in the last point there, if the changes don't go away quickly or they last longer than expected, then perhaps. Now, that was a few months ago. So if I was still depressed as a result of that, then perhaps that's a flag to say, yes, we should be concerned. This has lasted longer than it kind of needs to, or longer than expected. Longer than expected is probably the right way to say it. And, you know, again, if you've got all these three things, you've got a major change in the way they're thinking, or if there's a change in their ability to kind of go about their daily life, and these things don't go away quickly, or they don't go away quicker than you'd think they would, then we should be more concerned that there is developing into a mental illness. Hope that makes sense so far. Let's have a look at some statistics around mental illness in Australia. Now, this statistic here is quite interesting for me. I think this is quite amazing that 1 in 5 Australian adults, and this is between 16 and 85 years old, will experience a mental illness in any 12-month period. So 1 in 5 Australian adults experience a mental illness in any 1 year period. So they could be significant or mild, you know, mental illnesses, but they are diagnosed mental illnesses. So these are not people who are experiencing depression for a couple of days after a loved one passed away or something like that. This is where there's a diagnosed mental illness. So 1 in 5. So to put that in perspective, if we have 10 people in a room, 2 of those people If we have 20 people in the room, 4 of them. If we have 100 people in the room, 20 of them. So start thinking about your organization, your workplace, how many people are in that workplace, and then have a look at what 20% looks like for you in that workplace. Because most of our workplaces are large, they're quite large, and even if they're not, one in 5 people, it's quite likely that there is somebody in your workplace right now who's experiencing a mental health issue, or who has at some point in the last 12 months experienced a mental health issue or a mental illness. So this statistic is, for me, quite sobering, really. I think it's quite interesting to think about it from this perspective. So 1 in 5 Australians have a common mental illness in any 1 year, which is kind of looked at, but 65% of these people don't receive any professional help for their mental illness. Now, this is a bit of a problem, because what we know about mental illness is that the earlier somebody receives help to assist them with their mental illness, the more likely it is that they will recover from that, and the recovery will be quicker and easier. Now, without seeking mental health assistance or assistance with the mental illness, it is likely that that mental illness will continue to develop and get worse and worse over time, and therefore harder to recover from, harder to address from a therapy point of view, or from an intervention point of view. It becomes harder to manage. So early intervention is super key to start bumping this percentage up. 65% of people with a common mental illness don't get any professional help. So yeah, and we know very clearly that those people experiencing a mental illness who do receive professional help have a much better chance of recovery, they have a much better chance of improvement and returning to normal function. So it's quite a shocking statistic, isn't it? I find this quite shocking. And this is where the mental health first aid skills come in, because in mental health first aid, we're really trained to identify when somebody might be experiencing a mental health problem. And we're also trained in helping that person seek professional help, or encouraging them to seek professional help. So it's all geared to get this 65% of people, this stat, reduced. Yeah, I'd like everyone who's experienced a mental health issue to receive professional help. Now, here in Victoria, there's some interesting stuff in the media today around the Mental Health Royal Commission, and some interesting things about access and stuff like that. So the service system can be hard to manage or hard to access, but still, if we can get people to access it, then it's a much better outcome for them and for us. Whoops. All right, so let's have a look at some statistics here. I would like you to tell me, just overall, who do you think experiences most mental illness? Do you think it's men or women, males or females? Who experiences the higher rate of mental illness, do you think, in Australia? So we've got women, men, both the same. Men. Yeah, let me know. What do you think? Women, men, both. They're both different figures. One is definitely higher than the other. All right, so let's have a look. Most people are saying men. So for men, anxiety disorders, 10.8%, depressive and bipolar disorders, 5.3%, and substance use disorders, 7%. But it is actually females who experience the higher rates of mental illness in Australia, and it's quite a jump, 17.6 to 22.3%. It's quite large. So females are clearly at more risk of experiencing a mental illness. Maribel, the stats are from a national health and wellbeing survey that was done some years ago. It's the most recent and most relevant survey of its type. So the stats are a little bit old now, but it is still, even though it is a little bit old, it's still the best, most reliable statistics we can draw from proper research. I can get you the exact details if you'd like to have a look at it. But yes, it's a national survey done yeah, on a national basis. I can give you all the details, and yeah, send me an email after the webinar, and I'll connect you up with that detail. We go through this in a lot of detail in the 2-day course, actually. But yes, so they are nationally validated stats, and even still, anecdotal evidence now does say that this what's presented here, these statistics still stand to be true. So females experience more mental illness than men in general. So say 17, 18% versus 22%. Now, females, as you'll see here, have a higher rate of anxiety and depressive disorders than men, 10.8 versus 17.9 for anxiety, 5.3, 7.1 for depressive and bipolar disorders. But for substance use disorders, it's very much the other way around. So men experience much more substance use issues or substance use disorders than females do. Now, why do you think that these numbers here don't add up? So you can see 17.6 is much less than these numbers here, but why do you think those numbers don't add up? You can see the total is still 1 in 5, 20%. The reason they don't add up is because somebody can experience, and usually does experience, more than one of these. Yeah, that's correct, Maribel. Yep, you have pairing of disorders. That's right. So someone might experience anxiety and depression, for example. Yeah. All right, on top of this, another 0.5% of people have psychotic disorders in any 1 year. So often that's quite a surprising statistic for people when we talk about psychosis or psychotic disorder. So schizophrenia is a psychotic disorder, for example. Many people think this percentage is much higher, but it is actually only 0.5% of people. All right, so the other graph here that I want to show you, yeah, so I'll just skip backwards here for a second. Mary says, do we have to take the stats with a pinch of salt as we aren't capturing those people who aren't coming forward to seek help? These statistics are actually not from people who are seeking help. These statistics on this screen and the statistics we've talked about in terms of percentage of service seekers are proactively surveyed. So this is not taking Medicare data, for example. It's actually proactive surveys that sample the population and ask them to explain if they have experienced mental illness or if they've sought help. So actually, no, these statistics are very true and very valid. Yeah. Yeah, if we looked at mental health from Medicare stats, we would see that mental health is the most claimed for Medicare service. So it's quite interesting when we think about it in all these different ways. But yes, that's how it kind of works. Yeah, hope that's useful for you, Mary. All right, so on this screen, we've got a list of our industries down the left-hand side by ANZIC code, and our sort of mental health condition presence, if you like. And the blue and the green highlights are the top 3 in each category. So for any mental health condition, we can see that electricity, gas, water and waste services, those industries, information, media and telecommunication, and financial and insurance services are very high. They're higher than the average. So 33%, for example, in financial and insurance services, 33% of people will experience some kind of mental health condition. So it's higher than average, right? So, you know, have a look at this list and have a look at your industry and have a think about or have a look at what the rate is or what the incidence is of mental health conditions in your industry. Because I always find this very, very interesting. Do a lot of work with government, for example, and depending on what sort of focus they're on, then they might fall into these categories. And we know that in that case, it's not one in, you know, it's not 20%, it's 30%, for example. So it's quite marked. And again, if we've got a workforce of 100 people, it goes from 20 people to 30 people. So it does a little bit of a bump. So yeah, it just shows you how it is. For anxiety conditions, it's the same as the overall, but for affective conditions or substance use conditions, the highest is 12.9 construction, So construction has the highest rate of substance use, and that may be kind of easily explained given the fact that in construction it's mostly male dominated, and we know that 7% of men experience substance use conditions, so that might be why that stat's there. But even still, substance use in a construction setting is probably not a great thing for people's health and well-being. So just another way to have a think about your industry and how many people it's likely in your business or in your workplace might be affected from a statistical point of view anyway by a mental health condition. Now, if we have a look at some stats from a dollar point of view, then let's have a look at it from that view. Mental ill health costs Australian workplaces $4.7 billion in absenteeism, 1.6 billion in presenteeism, and 146 million in compensation claims per year. So it's quite an impact on Australian businesses, and this is across the board, but $4.7 billion in absenteeism. So that's just lost productivity from people being absent due to mental health issues. 1.6 billion in presenteeism. So this is people who are at work, but who are affected by their mental illness, or it's having an impact on their productivity. And compensation claims, $146 million per year. Now, if someone's working full-time, only 22% of full-time workers with signs of common mental illness receive treatment for their mental health problems. So again, that stat, generally speaking, that 65% of people, so 35% of people are getting assistance in the general population. If you're a full-time worker, it drops to 22% of full-time workers. So it's quite low. It's quite low, and I'm quite shocked at this stat. Every time I see it, it's quite low. So this means that 78% of people who are working full-time don't receive any treatment. Yeah, and this is a bit of a problem, because if the mental illness does develop and it is having impacts on work, then our productivity and all those sorts of things are going to be affected in our workplace. So 35% of people get help, but what do we think the percentages are for depression or depressive disorders, anxiety disorders, and substance use disorders? Tell me in the chat box what you think these stats are for depressive disorders, anxiety disorders, and substance use disorders. I think you'll be quite surprised by these stats. Yeah, let's have a look. So depressive disorders, 59% of people receive help. Anxiety is 38% of people received help. And substance use is 24%. So I think with depressive disorders, I think partly the reason why this is quite high, it's not high enough, let's be clear, but why it's this high is we have a public discourse around depression. We see examples of depression in media, in sport, in entertainment kind of areas, that kind of thing. We see it. We've all got an understanding of Beyond Blue and the Black Dog and those sorts of things. So I think the public discourse around depression is quite high. So I think that drives this stat. Anxiety is less understood, and substance use disorders 24%. Why is it that you think, why do you think that people don't go on to get the assistance that they need? Give me some reasons why. Why do you think people who are experiencing mental ill health don't go and get support? Yeah, time, stigma, thinking that they can cope. They might think that they have a treatable issue. Yeah, shame, absolutely. Shame's a big one. Cost, access, not contacting with therapists. Yeah, these are all really good reasons. The key one, and it's again documented well through research, is stigma. People feel an intense stigma around mental illness or mental ill health, and so they won't seek help because of that stigma. And all these other reasons that you've given are excellent too. So time, they might think they've got a treatable issue that they can handle it themselves. Cost can be expensive, access, things like that. Yeah, and there's counters to all of these points, you know, and when we learn the mental health first aid skill set, we learn also how to address these issues with somebody that's experiencing mental illness. We learn about how you know, how they can access Medicare funded services, for example, if cost is a barrier. We learn how to get help, where to get it from, who can help with what. We learn all these things so that we can help that person, you know, get help, get the help that they need, get connected with a professional. Maribel says, the quality of treatment is sometimes questionable. Yes, that could be the case. Shirley says, in my experience, people seek assistance and the silos limit access. Yes, that can be true. So when we look at the, when we do the mental health course, the 2-day program, there's a great video that we show, and it someone explaining their experience of the service system. So what they were one of the people who, you know, 35% of people who went and sought help, they then talked about how difficult it was to continue receiving help in the system. So yes, people do seek assistance, but the statistic is really clear. It's only 35% of people who have a common mental illness do actually go and seek it and receive the help. So this is interesting because I think there's a misconception out there as well that, you know, people are aware of what mental health is and they'll go and get the help, but it's actually not the case. It's actually not the case. So mental health first aid, if we think about the spectrum of you know, intervention around mental illness, then we've got prevention here on the left, early intervention here in the middle, and treatment. And this arc that goes down the bottom is the pathway, right? So we can go from being well, we can be becoming unwell, we can be actively unwell, and then we can be recovering or getting a support and assistance for it. And mental health first aid really comes into play in the prevention stages when someone's becoming unwell and starting to show signs that they are becoming unwell. And when they're sort of actively unwell, you know, we can also see those signs. So mental health first aid really sits along the top here in this early intervention and prevention space, because we want to be able to get in early, like I was saying before. We want to be able to identify somebody who's experiencing a mental illness and actually help them and assist them forward to receive help. And the whole goal really is to try and get this curve to be a lot higher. So, you know, if we can get it going from well, becoming unwell, to recovery, awesome. You know, if we can avoid it from going down to unwell in the first place, this is excellent. This is what we want to do, because we know that that recovery piece will be a lot easier, a lot quicker, a lot more effective. So mental health first aid really fits in here. Often people say, how does it help with prevention? And the answer to that is simply around the stigma management side of things. When we learn about mental health and we learn about mental illness, we can actively address stigma, which helps people not become unwell in the first place. All right, so mental health first aid, what is it? Let's have a look at it. It is basically the help that's provided to a person who's developing a mental health problem, experiencing a worsening of an existing mental health problem, or someone who is developing or is in a mental health crisis. So, you know, it's the first aid that's given until appropriate professional treatment is received or until the crisis resolves. So very, very similar to physical first aid, isn't it? Now, if we turn up to a car crash and we see that someone's hurt quite severely, we are going to give them initial first aid and look after them until professional help arrives. And it is the same for mental illness, and it's the same for mental health. Now we say here, you can see this word there in the middle, mental health crisis. Mental health crisis is simply a mental illness in an extreme. So for example, anxiety in crisis might look like a panic attack, something like that. Depression in crisis might be expressed as somebody having active suicidal thoughts, things like that. So we want to obviously get involved beforehand, but before it becomes a crisis. But if we encounter somebody who's actively in crisis, then we need to learn how to actually help that person. So the course does exactly that. All right, so if I said to you, tell me about your workplace's first aid policies. You could probably give me a long list of what we do, right, in the workplace. You could say, oh, we've got a procedure, we've got a first aid kit. What else could you tell me? If I said to you, oh, I need your help, Susan, I need your help. I've got John here in the tea room. He was up a ladder fixing a light globe, and he's fallen off it. What would you do? Yeah, doctor's ABC. That's right. A physical first aid response would be in case, right? So we have typically in workplaces, we've got a good language around physical first aid. You know, we understand how it works. We understand what to do. We've got a model for it. We've got tools for it. We've got resources. You know, we have a first aid kit. We know how to call ambulances. We might have an occupational health and safety response. We have all of that in place. But what if I said to you, oh, Mary, I've come into work today, and one of my staff has told me that they're experiencing moderate depression. What would we do? What would you do in terms of, you know, responding to this person? You know, you're a HR person, and one of your people comes to you and says, "Oh, one of my team is experiencing depression." What's the response we have? What policies and procedures do we have in place within our organisations for dealing with that? What policies do we have in place for, you know, supporting somebody who's experiencing depression? And I'm not getting a lot of comments, but that's not unusual, because the reality, unfortunately, is that in most cases, you know, it's not something that we do have policies and procedures around. Yeah, and that's very normal. We don't have them, but we should, is the point. We should have it, because we're dealing with people, and people can experience a physical illness, but they can also experience a mental illness. So our organisations need to be equipped and skilled to respond to both sorts of illness. And the unfortunate reality is that most workplaces are not. Yeah, so a couple of questions. Maribel says, it depends. Sometimes we come into work and say, my back's a little sore. This doesn't trigger first aid. That's correct, absolutely. But, you know, if somebody came in and said, I'm experiencing mild depression, and they used that language, then we might ask some more questions about what that means. We might sort of use a coaching approach and say, oh, you know, tell me a little bit more about that. How long has that been going on for you? What impact is it having on you? So that we can then quickly ascertain whether or not it is actually more likely to be a mental illness or not. Because remember that duration thing we talked about before. So when do we do something in mental health first aid? This is very, very good question. Usually when we are seeing and observing signs, and we believe that there is a mental illness that might be at play, we would enact our mental health first aid model, and I'll show you that shortly. That's what we would do. Similarly, is if you came in and you observed in a colleague that they were looked very faint, looked very drained. Maybe their breathing is a little bit shallow. They might be put their hand on their chest. You know, we're looking at them going, nothing might be happening. They might just be, they might have just had a shock, or they might have just been surprised at something. Or equally, they might be experiencing a heart attack. We don't know until we actually get more information. So again, we wouldn't just rush up to somebody who says, oh, I've got a sore chest. We wouldn't go, right, you're having a heart attack. We'd go and we'd say, oh, what else is going on? Tell me a bit more, like, you know, how you're feeling, how's your left arm? You know, we'd ask more questions to quickly ascertain whether or not we think there is something that we need to actively provide support for. I hope that explains that a bit for you, Maribel. Mary says, refer to the EAP program. Yep, absolutely. Or other organisations, Beyond Blue, etc., etc. Yeah, brilliant. Really good. It's excellent. Now, we do have a model that we can use in mental health first aid, like we do with Doctors ABC. I'll show you that in a second. But taking this example further, let me introduce you to our colleague here. This is our collective colleague, Sandeep. He's a young apprentice who joined your team about a year ago. He's got a great attitude and he's very hardworking. He gets on well with everyone, and he always offers to stay late to support the team. lately you've noticed a few changes in Sandeep. He seems to have lost some confidence in himself, and he keeps coming to you and checking he's doing things right on tasks he's done with no problems in the past. Sandeep usually gets tasks done quickly and effectively, but lately simple things are taking him much longer than they should. And this is causing his co-workers to feel stressed about their deadlines. Sandeep has started taking more and more sick days and gives vague reasons why he can't come in. And when he does come in, he looks exhausted. So what are the things here that we can observe in Sandeep that might indicate to us that it is worth having a conversation with him about mental health? What are the things that Sandeep is doing or showing or displaying that might indicate that, yes, we need to have a conversation with Sandeep about his mental health? Yeah, Maribel says a change in attitude, aptitude, looking exhausted. Yeah, lack of confidence, change in behavior. Brilliant. Absolutely spot on. So yeah, if we start from the top, second paragraph there, you've noticed a few changes. He seems to have lost some confidence. He keeps coming to you and asking about things. So maybe he's displaying some anxiety there. He might be a bit anxious about his performance. He might be taking a lot of time, or he says here he's taking a lot more time than usual. It's causing his co-worker stress, and he's taking sick days with vague kind of reasons. Yeah, so these are all things that we could pick up on, and that could, and I'm going to stress the word here, could be the signs of a mental illness, but equally they may not be. So, you know, when we have a conversation with Sandeep, we can say, look, we're concerned, we're worried about you. I'm concerned about, you know, how you appear to be tired all the time, you've had a lot of sick leave. I just want to have a chat to you about that. I want to talk to you about that. And we have a model that we can use to do that. So well done, excellent. So when we're thinking about people in the workplace, here are some lists of behavioural and physical signs that somebody might be experiencing a mental health issue or a mental illness. If you have a read of this list, you know, both these lists, you know, these things could be mental illness, or they may not be. They may not be. They might be something else entirely. And this is part of the challenge, I think, with mental health, is that a lot of the things that we see can be transient, and they might be just someone's having a bad day, you know, down that sort of temporary mental illness or mental health feeling being quite poor. But equally, if somebody has all of these things or a number of these things, it might also be a sign that there is a mental health issue at play. So what we're really doing in mental health and getting the mental health first aid skills is having a look at these, being mindful of the different symptoms and signs of all the different mental illnesses, so that when we see them, we can make a bit more of an assessment whether or not, you know, whether or not we need to go and do something about it. Now, I've got a handy one pager that I can send you if you like after the webinar. Let us know. Send me an email after the webinar and let me know that you'd like this, and I can send it to you. And it's a tip sheet about how to support an employee with a mental health problem. And what I love about the mental health first aid program is that it's done using the Delphi method. And the Delphi method basically is a consensus methodology. So everything that's in the course is designed based on consensus between professionals and those with lived experience of mental illness. So when you learn the mental health first aid skills, they are basically things that experts and people with those mental illnesses agree do work. So it's very practical. It's really great. And this Delphi method actually underpins this worksheet or this tip sheet that I can give you too. All right, so how do we provide support as a manager to someone experiencing mental illness? And here's a few little tips for you. Now, we can seek advice on how best to accommodate the person in their role. We can ask the person what support they need. You know, just ask them about it. Help identify any workplace triggers that might be at play. You know, if there's something that's in the workplace that's triggering an anxiety or triggering a post-traumatic stress type disorder, then maybe we can identify and manage those. and try to adapt the way that you manage to reduce work-related stress. Yeah, sometimes the person might need additional support or things like that. And remember too that when it comes to adjusting things, some people require no adjustments at all. Some people require a lot. But many people don't require any actual workplace adjustments. It might be beyond a conversation, beyond talking about it, or a feeling of being understood. Many people don't need much more than that. So I said before that that we had a model similar to Doctors ABCD for mental health first aid, and it's ALGEE, so ALGEE. And unlike Doctors ABCD, which is a sequential model, D, check for danger first, do that first, and if there is danger, don't do anything else. Our model here for mental health first aid is a plan of attack. It's a strategy plan, if you like, for covering it. The first bit is to approach the person, assess and assist with any crisis. Then we want to be looking and listening and communicating with that person non-judgmentally. And this is quite specific in the different mental illnesses. How we do this for the different mental illnesses does change quite a bit. So although us as leaders and managers and coaches might say, well, I know very well how to listen and communicate non-judgmentally, depending on the mental illness that we're talking about, there are, for example, specific things that we do and don't do. The words that we do use and don't use, for example. The middle step there for G is give support and information. So part of our role as a mental health first aider is to give that person support and give them information about the mental illness or information about the support that they can receive or the support that's available. E, the first E is about encouraging the person to get appropriate professional help. So again, addressing that 35% statistic. We want most people, if we can get them to go and seek additional support, to go and do that. And then other supports. So it might be family, it might be friends, it might be things like eating better, avoiding alcohol, for example. It might be about exercise. It might be about learning meditation, all sorts of other supports really. But basically it's about getting them to, seek appropriate professional help and other support. So ALGEE, this is the model. And it is a simple model, but there's quite a lot of nuance in it when we get into it and we actually start using it. So the mental health first aid course covers a range of mental illnesses. So we look at the action plan, the ALGEE action plan, and then we look at these 4 areas. We look at depression, anxiety, psychosis, and substance use problems. So we look at these 4 kind of categories. These are the 4 umbrellas. So we look at depression. In depression, we look at suicide. In anxiety, we look at generalized anxiety, and we look at anxiety in crisis, which is things like a panic attack. Look at psychosis and all the conditions that sit under that. So, for example, schizophrenia is a mental illness that features psychosis. And we also have a look at substance use problems. And the reason we look at substance use is because mental health and substance use is often coexisting. So often people use substances to cope with the symptoms or the signs of their mental illness. And often people with mental illness will use a substance to address the feelings that they're having from that mental illness. So for example, somebody who's feeling depressed might have a couple of drinks, for example, to feel more happy, for example, even though that doesn't actually work. So they coexist. We look at crisis situations. So we look at suicidal thoughts or behaviors, non-suicidal self-injury, panic attacks. We look at what to do after trauma. So traumatic events are often we often spend quite a lot of time in our mental health first aid courses talking about traumatic events because in workplaces, these do happen quite a lot. So things like restructuring and things like redundancies, that sort of stuff that can be traumatic for people. We look at psychotic states and we look at aggressive behavior, as well as the severe effects from alcohol and other drug use. Now, what the evaluations show from doing the course is the following. Obviously, we have an increased knowledge of how to provide mental health first aid, but we also see a big positive shift in attitudes to appropriate treatment because we learn about the treatments, we learn about what works and what doesn't work. We have a decrease in stigmatizing attitude, which is great for everybody. We see a lot more support, in terms of team behaviours. We get more supportive of one another. We have a lot more confidence in providing support, and that's one of the key reasons that we do this work at Open Door, is because our coaches say to us, look, I think that something might be going on, but I just don't know how to have that conversation. I don't know how to provide the support. I'm worried about how to say it. I'm worried that if I say something, it'll make it worse, and those sorts of things. So yeah, it absolutely gives you that skill set. And a nice side effect, when you go through the course, we also see an improved mental health state in the people who do the course. So that's always nice. It's always good. Now, you can go on to become an accredited mental health first aider, just like you can go on to become an accredited physical first aider. You can go ahead and do that. So the model is that you do the 2-day program with us, the 2-day mental health first aid course, and then afterwards you can do a short accreditation test. I think it's 15 questions, multiple choice, and that gives you an accreditation to provide mental health first aid in a workplace setting, and that lasts for 3 years. And then there's a re-accreditation refresher schedule, very similar to CPR refreshers and things like that. And your workplace can actually go through and become an accredited workplace too, if you want to. That's something that you can do. Mental health first aid officers are the typical, it's the typical kind of content, or the name, or the title given for people who provide these services in the workplace. And basically, you become the person that will respond to a mental illness or mental health problem in the workplace within the realms of what you're capable of doing and your competence, and escalate things where you need to. That might be to call an ambulance, for example, or to take the person somewhere, or those sorts of things. So mental health first aid is very similar to physical first aid, as just dealing with mental illness as opposed to physical illness. That's the way to think about it. And I really encourage you to think about your workplaces to see if you do have mental health first aiders, because if you don't, it might be a good thing to have. Yeah. So that's the content for today. I'd love you now just to have a little think and type in for me into the chat box something that you're going to do to support the mental health of your colleagues and employees and team members back in the workplace, and something you're going to do for yourself, for your own mental health and mental wellness. For me, I am going to I'm going to go into the office, which is near the beach, and I'm going to have a little walk along the beach just to get some fresh air. It's a beautiful day today. Maribel says, I'm going to share the difference between mental health and mental illness. Yeah, great. That's awesome. I think the more that we talk about mental health and mental illness, the better, because the more we talk about it, the less stigma there is. Melinda says, I'm going to refresh others about our EAP assistance program. Brilliant. That's great. Mandy says, I'm going to be more aware of my own state and the state of others. Awesome. And Maribel says, I do a lot of exercise on my bike, but I'm going to keep doing it. Shirley says, more exercise, be open to discussions and ask people, how are you? Yeah, that's really great, Shirley, actually. Really just say, how are you? And being inquisitive about people's mental health is a great idea as well. Excellent. Well, I hope the content today has been interesting to you and useful for you in your role. We do have a, Melinda says, personally, we'd like to go to the beach too, but we don't have one. Well, I will enjoy it on your behalf, Melinda. Yeah, so do have a look at our website about the course. We do have a course in Canberra on Monday and Tuesday next week. If you're in Canberra and want to come along, there's still an opportunity to join us. I've put a link in the chat box there for you to register if you'd like to do that. We will shortly be scheduling our 2020 mental health first aid dates. If you'd like us to come to you, let us know. We can schedule a course in your city. We also deliver the course in-house. So if you have a team of people that you'd like skilled up in mental health first aid, we can come in-house and do that for you. Absolutely not a problem. We've done that a couple of times, and it's a really great process. It's often a lot cheaper as well to come in-house and do it that way than send someone to our public programs, but certainly we can do that, and we can structure that 2-day course in a lot of different ways as well. So have a look at the website. It's opendoorcoaching.com.au. go to the leadership development section, and our mental health first aid page is in there. And check out the link that I've put into the chat box there to have a look on Eventbrite for our upcoming course in Canberra next week. If you've got any questions, please feel free to send them through. I'll keep the line open for a moment or two. And yeah, please let me know if you've got any questions. But in the meantime, yeah, check out the website. I really do encourage you to have a think about the course, think about coming along to the program. These skills are really, really key and core for leaders, managers, coaches. They're essential skills. They're absolutely essential skills. So yeah, I really encourage you to consider coming along and taking part in one of our courses. Certainly the people who've done our course over the last couple of weeks have given a really great feedback and just found it really interesting and useful. That's the goal for us. So yeah, Melinda says, thank you. You're very welcome. Shirley says, thanks. Interesting. I think we met in Queensland a few years ago. Yeah, we might have, Shirley. Who knows? We might have. Yeah, absolutely. Maribel says it's great information and thank you. You're very welcome. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for spending an hour of your day with me here on this webinar from Open Door Coaching, looking at mental health and mental health first aid in the workplace. Hopefully we will see you on one of our mental health first aid courses soon, if not on one of our free webinars that we do every Friday. So thanks for being here again. My name is Nick McEwen Hall, Mental Health First Aid Facilitator for Open Door Coaching. It's great to have been spending this time with you today. Have a great afternoon. Bye for now.